With the 50th anniversary of the Rumble in the Jungle fresh in our minds, many people look back on that fight as one of the most sensational boxing matches of all time. However, 36 years before the Rumble, a boxing event took place that perhaps eclipsed Ali and Foreman's tussle in terms of fame, and certainly did so in terms of legacy. Here is the story of how one black American boxer took on the Nazis and won. With the storm clouds of war hanging over Europe, two boxers prepared to step into the ring to do battle in New York City's Yankee Stadium. For one, it was the chance for revenge against a boxer who had beaten him in their previous encounter. For the other, it was the opportunity to recapture the heavyweight crown he had lost a few years before. But the fight had become far more significant than just the heavyweight titles that were on the line, because one fighter, Max Schmeling, was a German representing Nazi Germany, while the other, Joe Louis, was cheered on by all of America. Despite being a black man in a highly segregated country, the event became huge, transcending sport, and Joe Louis' achievements allowed later black athletes to gain the acceptance and acclaim they deserved. Joe Louis Barrow was born in Alabama in 1914, the grandson of former slaves, and moved to Detroit when he was around 12. His mother wanted him to take up more peaceful activities, like learning the violin, but aged 11, Louis started boxing, hiding his boxing gloves in his violin case so his mother wouldn't know. His talent was obvious, and his first amateur bout came at 17. He lost that fight, but he quickly established himself as a promising talent with a string of victories, winning several local championships on the way. According to one story, when signing for his first fight, he could barely write and was only able to scrawl Joe Louis in large letters where his name was meant to go. This supposedly accounts for why he went by the name of Joe Louis rather than Joe Louis Barrow for the rest of his boxing career. It's more likely he omitted his last name in a continued effort to hide his hobby from his mother. But with his growing success, he would be unable to keep his secret for much longer. With an amateur record of 50-4, with 43 knockouts, Louis turned professional age 20. Joe Louis was one of the greatest fist fighters. He has sharp, hard punches. Every kid all over the world, every planet Earth, know the name Joe Louis. The name Joe Louis is boxing. Using his gifts of speed, uncommon power, and an astute boxing brain, Louis quickly rose through the ranks, registering 24 wins in his first 2 years as a pro, most coming by KO or TKO. Louis had the exploits of another black boxer, Jack Johnson, to thank for this. Johnson, who had been active around 25 years earlier, had become the first ever black heavyweight champion in 1909. But he had also engaged in what was seen as inappropriate and unacceptable behavior. At the time, remember, American society was still largely segregated, both in practice and by law. So when Johnson married a white woman, it caused outrage, and the repercussions were still being felt when Louis was fighting his way to the top. To counter this, Louis's black management team joined up with a white promoter and set about transforming his image. As part of this, they drew up a set of 7 commandments for Louis to follow, which included never having his photo taken with a white woman and always living and fighting clean. The rebranding worked, and he was gradually accepted by the American public as an exciting rising sports star. But this was still the 1930s, and the sports press insisted on referring to him by a range of derogatory race-related nicknames. Some of these, such as the Safari Sandman, were particularly distasteful, but one he kept becoming known from then on as the Brown Bomber. And yes, if that sounds familiar, you'd be right. Former heavyweight champion and fellow Alabama native Deontay Wilder deliberately invoked Joe Louis when he chooses Bronze Bomber moniker after taking the bronze medal in the 2008 Olympics. But back to Joe Louis. Following his image makeover, he was finally being lined up for his shot at the title against James J. Braddock It was now 1936, and by this time, Lewis was considered the No.1 heavyweight contender. But before facing Braddock, he accepted a final tune-up fight against the unassuming German. Max Schmeling was a former world champion, but had been given the title after a win by disqualification, and he lost it soon after. At 30, he was also regarded as being well past his best, and wasn't expected to give Lewis any trouble. But as has happened so many times in boxing, Lewis took his eye off the ball. It turns out Joe Lewis had just discovered golf, and before the fight, he spent more time on the fairway than in the gym. Schmeling, on the other hand, endured a strenuous training camp and felt confident, having identified a flaw in Lewis's technique. After throwing a jab, Louis tended to drop his left hand, and in the fight, Schmeling made him pay for it. He knocked him down for the first time in his career, inflicted heavy damage to his face, and finally knocked him out in the 12th. This result caused a major headache for the management teams of both Lewis and Braddock, who had been set to contest the heavyweight championship once Lewis had dealt with Schmeling. It's funny, isn't it? Promoters never seem to learn. It was also believed that, should Schmeling capture the heavyweight title, the Nazi authorities would refuse to let him fight Louis or maybe even any other Americans. Finally, although the US and Germany were not yet openly hostile, tensions were rising, and many were against giving the fight to Schmeling due to his links to Hitler. Instead, Lewis was given the opportunity to challenge Braddock for the title. The bout started badly for Lewis when he suffered a first-round knockdown. However, he climbed from the canvas to secure a stunning victory in the 8th, knocking Braddock out cold with a beautiful right cross and smashing his teeth through his gum shield and lip. In the process, it was to be the only knockout loss of Braddock's career. This victory was cause for jubilation among the African-American community, but white Americans still overwhelmingly supported any white fighter against a black boxer by default. But this was soon to change. Louis defended his title 3 times in the following 12 months, but for him, there was only one fight to be made. He was desperate to avenge his loss to Schmeling, refusing to call himself champion before he righted the wrong. And a year to the day after beating Braddock, he was given the chance to try. It was 1938, and by now, hostilities between the United States and Germany were much more open. Public sentiment was also overtly anti-German, especially following the annexation of Austria. Earlier that year, this gave the fight a new dimension, because it was no longer just a boxing match. It became a clash of ideologies. In the build-up, Louis was fully aware of public expectation, and even President Franklin D. Roosevelt told him, "Joe, we need muscles like yours to beat Germany." On the other side, German propagandists made the most of the upcoming encounter, stating confidently that no black fighter could beat their man, and that Schmeling would provide further proof of the superiority of the Aryan race. As the fight approached, it gained momentum due to the political significance. It grew into one of the biggest and most eagerly anticipated fights of all time, and one of the most important sporting events of the 20th century. And against this background, something had changed for the first time. The majority of white Americans were now openly supporting the black fighter against his white opponent. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, Lewis took this fight far more seriously than their previous meeting. But Schmeling, convinced Lewis would be unable to make the adjustments, was far more laid back in his approach. When the first bell sounded, in front of just over 70,000 spectators, Louis jumped on Schmeling and administered a one-sided beating. That included 3 knockdowns before Schmeling's corner threw in the towel. The fight had lasted all of 2 minutes and 4 seconds, and in the whole time, Schmeling had thrown just 2 punches. Following the fight, Lewis was accepted as a national hero by both black and white Americans, breaking down racial barriers and allowing other black athletes to follow in his footsteps. He went on to defend his title 25 times, a record for all weight classes that still stands to this day. His stint as champ is also still the longest single reign in any weight class. After retiring from boxing, he was forced back into the ring due to financial difficulties. He won 8 more and lost 2. His final defeat coming in the form of a heavy beating by the up-and-coming Rocky Marciano. He then hung up the gloves for good, with his professional record standing at 66, 3 and 50 to coming by way of knockout. Most boxing fans nowadays consider Muhammad Ali the greatest of all time. But Ali himself named Joe Louis, along with Sugar Ray Robinson, as the 2 greatest to ever do it. For his part, Schmeling played a reluctant role in Germany's pre-war propaganda, although he refused to give up his German citizenship. And he watched films of the first fight with Hitler, went hunting with Goering, and was praised by Goebbels. He never joined the Nazi Party, and was uncomfortable with the way the fight was framed. His manager was a Jewish American, who he refused to fire, and he also sheltered to Jewish boys during the Kristallnacht pogrom, so his actions back up his claims that he was just a simple boxer and not a Nazi sympathizer. After their fight, Schmeling and Lewis became close friends. At Lewis's funeral, Schmeling was one of the pallbearers. Joe Louis died on April 12, 1981, having served in the Army during the war. President Ronald Reagan granted permission for him to be buried at Arlington National Cemetery despite him never having seen combat. Perhaps one of the most fitting epitaphs came from renowned sports writer Jimmy Cannon when it was suggested that Lewis was a credit to his race. Cannon retorted, "Yes, Joe Louis is a credit to his race, the human race."